Agent Morris with the NSA.
There is something real here.
Do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and from which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Biologics came to some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Those could represent exquisite new adversary technology.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
The government is covering up some level of its knowledge and understanding about what some of those things are.
The Soul Foundation, which just announced a new initiative for UFO research and policy.
It's nuts, man. I mean, we're just small-town buds who saw a UFO in the woods. I mean, now we're hanging out with the government.
Wow. What floor were you guys on?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Smiles Lewis. Welcome to another live edition of Anomaly-NOW, straight out of Austin, Texas. It is Wednesday, October 9th, 2024, and this is the live weekly news media roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Scientific Anomaly Institute, aka the Anomaly Archives. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in live. Thank you for listening to the rebroadcast. Let's dive right in. It's been a crazy week. There's so much going on in the paranormal and ufological world, but of course in our everyday lives and the lives of our loved ones and our brothers and sisters of humanity across the planet. So, of course, you can go to our website, anomalyarchives.org, and find links to all of our past shows at the video link under Anomaly-NOW. We've got all the past shows linked up there, audio, video links that we discuss in each episode. And, of course, we post our free occasional email newsletter there at the website. You can also go to our Flipboard, flipboard.com/@anomalyarchives, and see the thousands of articles that we've flipped over. Not going to get to all these amazing and fun and interesting articles tonight, but definitely a lot on the plate. So if you're playing the home game, you can go check it out right now, or hey, check it out anytime. Also at the anomalyarchives.org website, we have begun posting web pages for each of our monthly Anomaly Academy Cadet lecture series. And last month, I posted something from the archives, a presentation that paranormal Bigfoot cryptozoology researcher Rob Riggs presented to the Anomaly Archives audience here in Austin back in 2014. It was, I believe, his second to last live talk presentation before his untimely passing in 2015. You can become a member at the $10 a month level and get access to this 2-hour lecture, as well as each of the lectures that we started back in June, July, August, and then Rob Riggs for September. And coming up next month, we have Greg Bishop presenting Can Hard Data and Materialism Solve the UFO Enigma? That's going to be Wednesday, October 23rd at 7 p.m. So in the place of this live weekly Anomaly-NOW roundup, we'll be having our special patrons only presentation with our good friend Greg Bishop. Always an interesting outside the box thinker. And if you go to this public announcement page for that lecture, you can find some great links to our website where we have a whole bunch of his best interviews that are online archived there, the links to them. And of course, if you go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/anomalyarchives, you can click on the various links that are public, like that same public newsletter that we post at our website. We also distribute free through the Patreon account there. So what news are we going to start with tonight? Well, would it surprise you to hear this voice?
Helene, 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 you came in here and broke us all apart. Helene, 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 but we're all here to mend these broken hearts, and that's what I'm doing here. So I really really wish that we were all together for another reason, but we all have seen the devastation. I mean, who knew?
Who knew? No, we don't have any top secret documents that reveal who knew how bad this was going to be and failed to tell the public. No, but there certainly are rampant conspiracy theories and rumor mongering happening, undoubtedly from all sides. In fact, so much so that the Associated Press, as and other outlets, of course, have been reporting after the deluge, the lies, misinformation, and hoaxes about Helene cloud the recovery. Of course, that clip of Dolly Parton, she is donating $1 million of her own money, or I guess her foundation's money, to help with the recovery. That's awesome. I think she's a wonderful, nonpartisan activist who uses her power as an icon, as a singer, as a media mogul to do good things very often. And I really appreciate that. Yeah, so over at the Associated Press, apnews.com, just as I'm sure you've undoubtedly heard, there are all kinds of rumors flying about the lack of response on the part of FEMA and things that people are saying that they're seeing on the ground as opposed to that are being reported in the media. But I do want to call your attention to our good friend Micah Hanks, micahhanks.com, and of course the debrief.org. Micah just recently relocated, I believe, to Asheville and has been witnessing this disaster firsthand. And as of a couple of days ago, he was in his 9th or 10th day without power, without water, without internet, though he did have access to a cell phone and a charger, and has enough communications with his local friends, family, and supporters and neighbors in his very new neighborhood where he just moved, that he has been able to connect with folks, but they already have learned of the deaths of various friends and family, and there are still tons of people missing. I highly recommend you check out his free and pay podcast over at micahhanks.com. There's the October 5th one, Hurricane Helene, report from the front lines of a disaster zone. And if you're an ex-podcast subscriber to his extra material, the 10/6 Helene stories and conspiracy theories episode is particularly good as well, because they do address a lot of the rumors that are flying and give their experience with what they have observed, what they've heard. And I really, again, applaud Micah's ability to stay above the political fray and just focus on what's important, which is getting people help in this dire situation. And of course, this is as our brothers and sisters in humanity in Florida are under siege with this new Milton tornado generating hurricane. Really pray for all those folks and hope everybody stays safe and gets through this. But yes, over at the debrief.org, Hurricane Helene, an on-the-ground report from a devastated region by Micah Hanks, has photographs by he and his friends who are literally there on the ground. And in the podcast, they talk about the various stories and give really good concrete examples of how rumors get started and distorted and spread without there actually having been an instigating incident, or the instigating incident is so different from what's then being morphed into the rumor or the conspiracy theory. But yeah, the footage, I'm sure you've all seen, it's just horrendous. It's really terrible what folks are going through there. And of course, all of the conspiracy stuff, or a whole brand of it, has to do with this idea of weather modification and weather control and weather warfare. And of course, this all reminds me of how I spoke to this subject back in, I guess it was April, several months back at the beginning of this year, and how we and my co-host Mac White back in the day doing PsyOp Radio interviewed various people, including a gentleman who also is no longer with us, but who had written a book on weather warfare and done the research on weather modification, that sort of thing. Of course, in that episode that I'm referring to, we talked about cloud seeding, how people may not realize this, but it's a legit thing. At least it is actively done around the world and actively here in Texas and regulated by the government. But of course, there have been a slew of claims about the anomalousness of this current Milton hurricane, as well as the previous Helene. This idea that somehow the hurricane was either steered or intensified in both cases. And these are ideas that Mac and I used to explore as obvious speculation and try to investigate the types of science and technology that might make it possible. And the facts that this has been researched so many times by our government and our military for various reasons, from the hypothetically humanitarian to the outright, let's, deluge this part of a foreign country so that it washes out their roads so that they can't resupply their troops, kind of a thing. So John Greenwald Jr. over at theblackvault.com has this October 9th article, Project Cyclops, Efforts in Hurricane Modification Showed Promising Results in 1961. And of course, he has a whole section on weather modification where he talks about the other projects that I was recently reminded of, Project Cirrus and Project Storm Fury. And of course, that you can go to Wikipedia or your preferred, quote unquote, trusted informational site. And yeah, there's tons of information out there about efforts to modify the weather. Again, I am not alleging that has happened. To me, it's like with any conspiracy theory, if you can't get any kind of verifiable information, no matter how extraordinary just what the optics, so to speak, are, you really have a responsibility to not make outrageous claims. But it is imperative, I think, for us to know the history of this research and the fact that there's various agreements, disagreements as to the success of these projects. But you might find these links that we'll provide in tonight's show notes tomorrow in the archive of the show of interest in this area. And so, speaking of conspiracy stuff, this next clip I only became aware of because a conspiracy friend, a friend from that community, had sent me a link to a video that I thought I recognized the narrator, and it featured footage that I was familiar with and not familiar with, stuff referencing Project Cirrus, stuff referencing Storm Fury, but what I hadn't seen, I don't think, was this clip that I'll play for you right now.
I came back to Washington, not distressed, not discouraged. I came back strong in the belief that when people know each other, they understand each other. And if they understand each other, they don't need to fight each other. The President, upon my recommendation as Chairman of the Space Council, sent a message to the Congress. And that message calls for new frontiers, new visions. It calls for us taking the steps now that will make us no longer second in space and in science. It lays the predicate and the foundation for a space communication satellite that will permit the people of the world to see one television program at the same time throughout the world. Think about that kind of communication and think about the opportunity that will provide. It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world. It lays the predicate for the steps that are necessary to send a man to the moon. It lays the steps that's necessary to provide a nuclear rocket that will produce benefits that are so unlimited that I couldn't tell you about them if I had all afternoon. But that's the kind of a world that you're living in. Oh, if I could have seen when I was graduating here 30 years ago, that I would leave Washington with my wife and go around the world in 14 days and spend more than 100 hours in conferences with heads of state during those 14 days. It was beyond my greatest expectations, my fondest dreams. And yet, I was graduated into a somewhat backward civilization.
Yeah, so that's almost a 3-minute clip. I actually edited out a little bit of it, but I find that a very powerful clip. LBJ is a very problematic icon, historical figure that I mostly have bad feelings about from a conspiracy standpoint. Obviously, he was in power when a lot of good stuff happened, but also a lot of bad stuff. But interestingly enough, so a conspiracy video called Weather Weaponization and Hurricane Ian that was produced by Greg Reese, who is a former journalist, writer, videographer for Alex Jones's InfoWars. That video was sent to me, and it opens with a very dramatically dramatized version of that clip, which I was unfamiliar with. And that clip is from the TexasArchive.org, TexasArchive.org, and is titled Vice President Johnson at Southwest Texas State University, 1962. Now, obviously, he's not talking about the technology itself. He's just saying we introduce a bill that would lead to these kinds of visionary technologies. But there he is saying this idea that, and if it's like everything with humanity, if we can, we're gonna, even if we probably shouldn't. Again, all of which is to say, I have no idea whether weather modification efforts are actively being utilized in such a heinous way as to terrorize Americans, whether by our own governments, military, or others around the world. But I just find this technology very interesting. And the source of that conspiracy video just reminds me that folks like the Southern Poverty Law Center have web pages you can visit that document the allegations of racism and anti-Semitism against Greg Reese and Alex Jones in perpetuation of these kinds of broadcasts. Now, moving away from all of that, just here is the Texas Archive of the Moving Image webpage where you can find that clip. It's around the 24-minute mark. Obviously, a much longer presentation. So let's jump into some UFO news, shall we? There's so much to go on. Now, is that the one? Yes. So Michael Schellenberger is this independent journalist who came to my attention because I believe it was about a year ago he started writing about UFOs, and I'd never heard of him before. And I very quickly became aware of his investigative journalism focused on things like the Twitter files and privacy and censorship. And so he and several of the other writers and researchers that he's been working with have, I believe they're the ones that have coined the phrase censorship industrial complex, for obvious reference to the Eisenhower military industrial complex phrase. But he has just yesterday released this new article, Pentagon is illegally hiding secret UFO program from Congress, whistleblowers allege. New government whistleblowers reveal for the first time the name of the unacknowledged Special Access Program, USAP. for unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs. Now, the big news here is that the program is allegedly called Immaculate Constellation, and this is getting some traction in the UFO news and, of course, News Nation, not being particularly mainstream, but they seem to have made their debut to my awareness by covering the UFO UAP scene with Ross Coulthart, who, of course, is the main proponent of this news story now over at newsnationnow.com. Report names Immaculate Constellation UAP program, and there is a link to the approximate almost 2-hour interview with him talking to Michael Schellenberger about this. And I do actually, Ross Coulthart is somebody who I think is doing some good work, and I certainly appreciate that there are folks like him that are interfacing with the mainstream media, such as it is, to report on these kinds of things. But he's not always somebody whose interviews I particularly enjoy, but I found this to be worth your time. You may want to check that out. But what this also reminded me of is how back in June, I suddenly was realizing that Michael Schellenberger was no longer going to be the keynote speaker at this year's International MUFON Symposium, which was being held in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so over at the UFO Updates list on Facebook, that group, I posted, does anybody have information on why the original keynote presenter, Michael Schellenberger, is no longer listed as participating in this year's MUFON Symposium? I don't know when the change occurred, but he's no longer listed. And yeah, sure enough, I had gotten some screenshots of this. And in fact, you can go to archive.org, the Internet Archive, and go back and find that this was, at least for a month or two, maybe 3 months, on their website, with him showing as keynote speaker on this title, UAPs and U.S. Government Disinformation, which seems entirely appropriate for his area of expertise. Also, in this public.news article by Schellenberger, he does mention, well, I don't know if he mentions by name, but he alludes to the infamous harassment and disinformation campaign against Paul Benowitz that, of course, was documented by our good friend Greg Bishop and others. Greg put out in, I think, 2005, the very important work called Project Beta, which is actually the name that Benowitz used for his report on what he was observing. But yeah, some great stuff coming out. Not sure what the biggest thing is, but basically Schellenberger is saying that he has a new unnamed source that's been vetted and who seems to be clarifying the existence of a yet to be acknowledged intelligence database focused on UFOs, UAPs for use by the military and the intelligence agencies that has not been acknowledged. It's called Immaculate Constellation, and that features like high quality videos, photographs, and information on these cases. So that should be interesting. And he basically just saying that it's been corroborated by other witnesses that he's in contact with. Now, I hope he's doing his due diligence, which I think he is, but looking forward to hearing more about that. So, remember that Unsolved Mysteries TV show? Man, boy, they came back with a vengeance a few years ago, and I've really enjoyed the high quality production values on this show series. And they do, of course, occasionally touch on UFOs. And in this most recent Volume 5 series, there are a number of episodes that are very interesting and worth you taking a look at, I think, including one on the cattle mutilations. This article here over at screenrant.com, Unsolved Mysteries, Volume 5, Episode 3, The True Story Behind the Cattle Mutilation Mystery. This features a lot of interview footage with Christopher O'Brien, who was, of course, really good friends with our late friend, cattle mutilation researcher and paranormal researcher David Perkins. And so I highly recommend this. Also, of note and interest here, you can see these photographs of two of the main witnesses that are interviewed representing this more recent, circa 2020, 2019, 2021 series of Oregon focused cattle mutilation incidents. And, you know, I have, like so many of these paranormal subjects, I vacillate between whether there's a real prosaic explanation here. In fact, I need to dig out of our archives British Fortean zoologist, aka a cryptozoologist, Jonathan Downes, when he was visiting here investigating Texas's blue dogs, aka chupacabras, gave a lecture to our Austin audience, our Anomaly Archives audience, about these kinds of predation incidents. And he's, of course, like on the very skeptical end, thinking it's very much all explainable, but he still is open-minded. Anyway, I need to clean up that audio and release that. But I had never seen or heard these particular ranchers speak about these incidents in Oregon. And again, the descriptions of these circumstances, again, these are people who work every day with livestock and know how they behave and know what they look like when they've died of natural causes and been preyed upon by scavengers like coyotes and whatnot. And so it's just reaffirming to me that there's something weird going on here. And if it's at all as widespread as it seems to have been over these many decades, it is just off the charts weird. And of course, I guess it was last year, Mark Jackson and I were reporting on the cases happening here in Texas, which now there seems to be a clampdown on any further discussion of by law enforcement. And I believe that's kind of alluded to in this particular episode. But there's other episodes of this new Unsolved Mysteries series that you might enjoy, including one on Roswell. And I am no huge fan of Roswell, but I have to admit it does still appeal to me, and there are so many ways to dive into it that even as jaded as I am about that case, I found their episode to be pretty good. And of course, it features Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt, and I'm more of a fan of Kevin Randall than I am of Don Schmidt, mainly because of Don Schmidt's having bought into the Roswell slides that turned out to be a mummified body of a young Native American child. That really took a lot out of the wind of any sails that I might have given credence to with Don Schmidt. But it was nice seeing them work together, and here they are, much older than when they first started investigating the Roswell case. So I think you might enjoy that. And there's these little capsule reviews of these persons being in this new series over at the cinemaholic.com. This one on Kevin Randall, and the one I started to show is on one of the paranormal episodes that features this fellow, Don Phillips. Where is the paranormal researcher now? And in this episode, they talk about how he approached Steve Mera, who I believe worked with Robbie Graham a few years ago, producing some good UFO content. But I recognize the name Don Phillips in his face. This is a picture that when he was much younger. Fascinating situation whereby this man claims to have had a lifelong ability to see dead people, or rather hear them and seemingly engage with and interact with them, and that this has helped inform his paranormal parapsychological endeavors. And at some point when he was helping a household that was experiencing increased malevolent manifestations, one of the beings that he encountered, I believe that her name turned out to be Becky, or at least that's the name that he gave or that she gave. And this transformed his research and seemed to boost his ability to discern psychic information from the environment and on different cases he was. Anyway, there's the particular episode for this I found, again, very, very compelling and very interesting, and maybe worth your while. Yes, spirit named Becky. All right, moving right along. Another thing from the blackvault.com. We've been talking about this idea that there's some there's two different ideas really going on with SETI and Professor Simon, who keeps talking about there having been a technological signature, if not actual communication and or signs of life, civilization on another planet that's not getting, of course, reported in that way yet, but just seeded in the mainstream news. But there's been this other story that's been percolating for a while now, that there have supposedly been classified briefings with members of Congress related to something discovered with the James Webb Telescope, and this idea that it's been tracking an object that is possibly a technological object and that has course corrected and that is coming towards Earth. All kinds of fun, speculative possibilities there. But of course, John Greenwald has tried to get any information he can through FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests. And so he has gotten a denial. NASA denies existence of classified briefings on James Webb Telescope discoveries. I haven't really had the chance yet to dive into this and see if he has any better sources than have been named, but he's citing some of the same things that I've been seeing, the Psychoactivo podcast and others that have been trafficking in this idea, this speculation, this rumor, this conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory being that there are secret meetings happening and that the word is not being promulgated to the public at large, presumably not so as not to panic anybody or just because they don't know what it is. And maybe it is just a rock that is changing course because, well, it's affected by the gravity of different things it's passing near, or it was impacted by something, much in the same way that we would try to deflect it if it was dangerous to us. So that's over at theblackvault.com. Meanwhile, over at theobservermagazine.substack.com, I've seen a few fun articles over here, but this one reminds me of something that I'll have to share with you all. But UFOs equals unbelievable financial opportunities. Maybe this will finally keep mom off our back about the piles of UFO books in our bedroom. And it's got that cute picture of a Adamski saucer raining down dollar bills. And yeah, this one's from late September, and it's just basically showing you some of the pricier, rare UFO-related or paranormal-related books that are out there, which of course got my attention because we have a lot of rare, valuable UFO and paranormal books in our collection. And some of the examples they have here are The Jessup Dimension by Anna Genslinger from Saucerian Press circa 1981. Price tag allegedly $7,500. Other ones include Homecoming of the Martians by Robert Dickoff and Barty Association. Price $1,440. Fun sci-fi cover there. And these others, one of the books from Charles Fort, as well as The History of Witches, Ghosts, and Highland Seers. That's, you can tell from the picture, is extremely old and has a price tag of over $10,000. And this shows some inside views of that. Anyway, that's over at theobservermagazine.substack.com. All of which reminds me of something I reported on in a previous show, which was how the Saucer Life podcast, done by our good friend Aaron Golias, had recently updated his important UFO books list to add our friends' books, Project Beta by Greg Bishop and Saucer Spooks and Kooks by Adam O'Reilly, among others, including Wayward Sons by Jack Brewer and the classic Into the Fringe by Carla Turner. But that phrase from the previous article of unbelievable financial opportunities. So there's this clip, and if anybody out there recognizes the news anchor woman whose voice this is, Aaron uses this clip in many episodes of his Saucer Life podcast, which I do highly recommend. I really, really like that podcast. Always enjoyable. But this alternate version of the acronym UFO is hilarious. And here's the clip that Aaron uses in the Saucer Life podcast.
You
for unprecedented financial opportunity.
Be normal.
Unprecedented financial opportunity.
Unprecedented financial opportunity.
Yeah. I've been racking my brain trying to remember the name of that anchor woman. I've searched for anchor people, and I can picture her, but I just cannot seem to find it. But if you know who that is, maybe write it in the comments, or I'll ask Aaron. But it's nice to be seeing a variation on unprecedented financial opportunities, unbelievable financial opportunities being what's used here in this Guardian piece. But speaking of ideas, do my David Lynch. I haven't read the article yet by Avi Loeb, but the title alone got my attention because I think it is very apt, and that is, imagination is more important than knowledge. Now, Avi Loeb has, of course, made some pretty interesting claims about the extraordinary nature of some of the spherules, modules that he has discovered in some research on the ocean floor. And of course, he came to prominence talking about the Oumuamua object, which fits that description of like an object that came from outside our solar system and from climes very far away, and there were allegations of it possibly being a technological object and changing course and that sort of thing. But again, this title headline of imagination is more important than knowledge, I just find that to be a very useful way of thinking. I think we as humans, in trying to deal with the crises that we are facing, don't often enough allow for the fact that we are very creative beings, and we can very often come up with solutions to some of the worst problems and crises. So hopefully we'll get ourselves out of the situation we're in globally. But speaking of reading lists, I really love the blog I've mentioned before, Getting Spooked. That's tannerboyle.substack.com, or Tanner F. Boyle, TANNERFBOYLE.substack.com. He is the author of a book about Charles Fort and science fiction. And until he just sent out a notice about his putting out list number 3 of the Getting Spooked reading list, I was unaware that he had been doing a reading list, and so was very happy to look through his list of books, many of which I have not read, but I am aware of, like The Book of the Damned, the collected works of Charles Fort, of course, aware, and Fort is always good. But this one really warmed my heart. Like, if I didn't like this guy already for his take on parapolitical analysis of the paranormal and UFOs, he definitely has a Fortean streak. Well, otherwise, why would he have done a book on Charles Fort? But he has here, Giff, The Strange Tale of an Extra Special Talking Mongoose. I love this book. I love this story. The movie that was made about it recently is pretty good too. There are other books out there that are probably equally good, but this one by Christopher Joseph from 2017, Strange Attractor Press being associated with Mark Pilkington, who, of course, is famous for Mirage Men, the movie and the documentary. Anyway, I immediately became even more endeared to Tanner Boyle because of that. And, of course, Mothman Prophecies, John Keel's book from 1975. Some other interesting books that I was not necessarily aware of, Operators and Things, The Inner Life of a Schizophrenic by Barbara O'Brien. That looks to be interesting. And, of course, if you follow these links to his Getting Spooked podcast, you can see the others. So reading list 2, these are from September and October of 2023, so last year, but he just did a new update. But in this second to last update, he added A Deal with the Devil, the dark and twisted true story of one of the biggest cons in history by Blake Ellis and Melanie Hicken. Not familiar with that, not even sure what the con is in this case. And this title, Sally Denton's The Bluegrass Conspiracy, an inside story of power, greed, drugs, and murder, self-published in 2016. Oh, I'm sorry, did I not? Here we go. Sorry, I thought I'd changed the page. Yes, there's A Deal with the Devil, Bluegrass Conspiracy, and Double Fold, Libraries and the Assault on Paper. Oh, man. Okay. So Tanner writes, Doublefold is a thorough, albeit infuriating, exploration into the lies the American public has been fed about the durability of paper since the mid-20th century. Nicholson Baker laments the loss of various paper collections in libraries across the United States, all the way up to the Library of Congress, due to the promise of longevity and accessibility in microfilm and microfiche. Wouldn't you know it, neither is as convenient nor lasts as long as regular old paper. Besides being a heartfelt plea for the retention of physical archives, Baker investigates the entities who initiated the war on paper and their possible motives. Unsurprisingly, we see people in the emerging cybernetics movement and the CIA at the forefront. Yeah, you can read more over at Getting Spooked. Other books included in that second list from late last year, Mutants and Mystics, science fiction, superhero comics, and the paranormal by Jeffrey Kripal. That was, of course, one of the first things I heard about that drew my attention to Jeff Kripal from Rice University, who, of course, has launched the Archives of the Impossible in 2022. And so now we head over to the most recent October 2024, Getting Spooked reading list number 3, and some other interesting books. The Vertical Plane, The Mystery of the Dodleston Messages, a bizarre record of communication through time, circa 1989. Fairy Census, 2014 to 2017. Interesting. So he just says stories of fairies and other assorted fae folk are underrated within the Fortean canon, often overshadowed by the omnipresent UFO encounters or alien abduction. That's not to say that there aren't similarities. Of course, yes, you should check out the works of Joshua Cutchin if you aren't familiar. There's lots of overlap there. And this is why I really wanted to bring this up. So he cites our good friend Ed Conroy's wonderful book. I highly recommend it, Report on Communion, The Facts Behind the Most Controversial True Story of Our Time. That's all about Whitley Strieber. This came out right after the second book, Transformation, after the first one, Communion, came out. And I think Tanner's review of it is pretty on, but he's a little critical, but he still is recommending it. So another book, Father Ernetti's Chronovisor, The Creation and Disappearance of the World's First Time Machine, published in the year 2000. But yeah, he gives a little description of why he thinks these are good candidates for you to check out. And while you're there, you can go to the main site, tannerfboyle.substack.com, and see the latest, the Great Bigfoot Roundtable with Bradley, Emily, and Reed. So occasionally he does go to events in person and then gives reviews of those, whether they be UFO conferences or, in this case, a Bigfoot conference. Now, I think this one's behind a paywall, but it's almost 2 hours long. There's probably a preview you might be able to listen to. I have not had the chance to listen to this myself, but I'm sure I'll enjoy it. And you might as well. Okay, so the last thing for tonight I wanted to draw your attention to is this nice interview over at Mindplex. Psychedelics and the Coming Singularity, a conversation with David J. Brown about his book. And the web address for this is magazine.mindplex.ai. And by that .ai, you can tell that that's, of course, going to be part of the subject matter for this article here. Can psychedelics shape the future of AI and consciousness? David J. Brown's latest book connects the dots between two powerful forces driving human evolution. And who is interviewing Mr. Brown? Are You Serious? Yes, Are You Serious of Mondo fame and other past fantastic cyberpunk-oriented publications. So the book is the article is prefaced with this new book of interviews by David J. Brown casts a wide net. It chases after what the various interview subjects think about the singularity. But beyond that, as Brown says in my conversation with them, he asks them about simulation theory, DMT entities, psychedelics and ecological awareness, God and death. The diverse cast of characters are on the receiving end of Brown's inquiries, and almost every one of them remarks that Brown really asks the big questions. My personal favorite interviewees include the great trippy graphic novelist, comic book writer, and bon vivant Grant Morrison, the writer Eric Davis, that's Eric with a K, whose recent book, High Weirdness, looks at far-out psychedelic sci-fi techno-visions of the 1970s through the lens of the works of Philip K. Dick, Robert Anton Wilson, and Terence McKenna. Woohoo! And the almost indescribable Bruce Damer, who seems to be engaged in projects related to almost everything, including space science, virtual reality, and the origin of life, just to name a few. Damer also curates the Digibarn in Santa Cruz, which holds libraries and archives of Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna. Thank you! These are among the many wildly brilliant interview subjects. So it's not that long of an interview, but there's some very interesting exchanges and thought-provoking conversation here that I would highly recommend you check out. You know, a lot of people, when they talk about the singularity, immediately think of Kurzweil, and Are You Serious asks, there's not a lot of Kurzweilian hard science singularitarianism in the book. How would you respond to that? It's a very expansive view of the theme, which I like. What versions of singularities do you find most compelling? And he goes into just a kind of description about how the differences between what, Kurzweil is focusing on in terms of this idea of a technological singularity versus using it more as a metaphor. But they do get into some very interesting ideas, again, invoking McKenna, Teilhard de Chardin, and various ideas related to all of this. There's also some very interesting questions here. Are You Serious asks, you wrote, quote, the kind of insight that psychedelics offer to help guide its ethical development and avoid purely mechanistic outcomes, unquote. I myself have a line in my memoir that psychedelics may be necessary to lubricate an otherwise brittle and mechanistic tech future. But a lot of the high-end techies that are into psychedelics, like Musk or Thiel, seem to develop Superman or supremacist ideas and attitudes. When I interviewed Martin Lee about acid dreams for High Frontiers back in 1987, he said psychedelics can be, quote-unquote, exaggerants that bring out whatever potential is inside a person in an outsized fashion. What do you think about the lessons learned about the unreliability of psychedelic use in turning out enlightened or compassionate humans? And I think that's a very salient question, especially as Brown basically says from his interactions with these really rich, high-tech people, the majority of them are doing psychedelics, for better or worse. There's some discussion of McKenna and his ideas about time wave zero, which of course also have this idea of an end point, and the ingression of novelty reaching a omega point, a singularity. And again, this question about, how do we keep this from becoming us living in a Black Mirror reality? In other words, how do we tame the technological beast so that we don't become enslaved by it or worse? And there is some very interesting back and forth here that you might find worth reading. And I do want to read some more of it, but I about scrolled halfway down through it. And, there's the typical optimism in the future thanks to young people. So, for instance, in the middle of this reply, Brown says, young people seem more optimistic than the older generations. I don't think the world has just gotten worse. I think it's gotten both better and worse at the same time. And the aging process tends to decrease neophilia and increase neophobia. This happens in all animal species, and humans are no exception. I see all the dystopian possibilities that everyone else my age sees: the division in our country, the climate crisis, the rise of racism, the threat of nuclear war, etc. But I also see enormous positive potential as well. The psychedelic revolution raising ecological awareness, AI evolution promising advances in medicine in virtually every field of human endeavor, incredible scientific advances, astonishing new technologies, and young people seeing through the corruption in our two-party political system. I suspect that this yin-yang nature of world will continue to accelerate and intensify, but that utopia or dystopia will never fully arrive. It will always be some kind It will always be some weird mix of the two with infinite evidence to suggest that either light or dark perspectives will prevail. And again goes on to talk about Terence McKenna and psychedelics. There is some other very interesting information in here too that I guess I knew was going on, but I just hadn't read about it in some time. And that is long state DMT experiments. In other words, psychedelic experiments whereby they are keeping people in an extended psychedelic state on DMT. DMT is a fascinating chemical that's found all over the place. So let's see. Are You Serious asks, why DMT? In other words, of all the psychedelics, and there are many of these chemical and plant wonders, what is it about DMT that fascinates us in this accelerating time? What are your thoughts? Brown, there are several reasons why DMT is special and unique in the world of psychedelics, as well as profoundly relevant to our accelerating time of information overload. Let me first provide a little background on DMT. It's endogenous to the human body. It's found in all mammalian species and throughout the plant world. It's ubiquitous throughout nature. And no biochemist can tell you what function it serves in any of these places. It seems to be both a neurotransmitter and a hormone in the human body, but no one really has a clue as to why it's there. It's a very simple molecule derived from the essential amino acid tryptophan, and its place in the natural world is a profound mystery. Now, it goes on to say, in studies with rodents, we know that DMT levels escalate in their brains after cardiac arrest, which lends credence to the popular idea that it mediates the near-death experience in human beings. When ingested in sufficient quantities, DMT experiences generally become an order of magnitude more intense than that of any of the other psychedelics, and it quite literally transports one to another world, which is commonly referred to as hyperspace by the psychonauts who have traveled there. One becomes completely immersed in a multidimensional reality that completely replaces our three-dimensional world, and it is often reported as seeming more real than real. It doesn't appear to be a hallucination. It seems completely real, and one remains fully lucid during the experience. And most profoundly, this new world appears to be populated by hyper-intelligent, non-human entities that seem to take great interest in communicating with us in various ways. Now, what it goes on to talk about is that he's written a whole other book called The Illustrated Field Guide to DMT Entities, where he creates a taxonomy and describes the 25 most commonly encountered DMT entities, which he says, such as the gray aliens, jesters, reptilians, octopoid beings, and, quote, the self-transforming machine elves of hyperspace that McKenna famously refers to. But what he goes on to say is that Rick Strassman, who, of course, did the leading government-approved scientific research into DMT, highly recommend you read and get your hands on any information that Strassman has provided. They are now doing these extended studies where they're having people take, like, I guess they're probably on an IV drip. And they're basically trying to see if they can corroborate the information that these people are coming into contact with while in these states, to see if it really is some kind of hyperspace that's outside of time that has connection to everything and every when, everywhere. And of course, it mentions that it was McKenna who in the 80s and 90s was popularizing DMT. Let's see. Anyway, there's a lot more, and I won't give away the ending, but I actually found it to be a very inspiring interview, and it's not that long, so you might want to check that out. I guess that is going to be it for this evening, and I just want to say thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate you all joining us, and I hope you'll like and subscribe, and maybe become a patron and go to our patreon.com/Anomaly Archives and help support us that way. Otherwise, take care, have a good night, and be safe, folks. And if you can help all the people in need through these many horrible disasters happening around our country and around the world, please take the time to do so. Good night.